More here, and it is 1 p.m. or thereabouts, I believe, on Monday. So thanks so much for tuning in, everyone who is and does later on. I appreciate it is different time zones for many people. So I think this is episode 17 of Startup Business Q&A. So every single week, except from one when I was about to have an operation, or I had about to get an operation in, we've managed to keep this going. So I really love the consistency in it. And it's only because you guys keep sending through the questions. So thank you so much for it. And there's quite a few things today. And in particular, being out of detail on Salesforce questions is about that. So let's go straight in. My first question, or rather this person says, my question for you is regards to creating a course. You have the 8-step startup course, but at what point did you create it? Is it too early for me to create a course that I could sell to people? So those of you who aren't aware, 8-Step Startup is the first course that I created. I started about a year ago. It is 73 lessons across 8 different themes for people building a business. I have to thank, pretty much every time I mention it, I have to thank so much support for it. And literally now we're a couple of hundred people who have actually signed up and have taken the course. So you can check it out at 8stepstartup.com. To answer the question here, at what point did you create the course? Pretty much when I had the idea, I just executed and made it. I thought to myself, because the motivation behind it was that there are a huge amount of gurus online who actually aren't gurus. They just read the same books anyone else does, and with zero experience, what they're doing is leveraging effective marketing to build a course which probably is quite pithy with very little experience. It's just someone who's good at conveying ideas, and that's arguably fine, but you know, pretending that they know their stuff. I did like to think that the 15 years of experience I've got with building businesses and working in sales and marketing and building my own startups would go some distance to providing you know, a half decent load of content, but bringing in the idea of professors, business owners and best-selling authors was something I thought of about a year ago, and I just started doing it. Now the thing is, I started selling it when I only had 6 lessons. So I didn't have 73 lessons at the start and then launched it. I pre-launched it at a very low introductory price with just 6 lessons, and the promise, of course, that by being an early adopter, you get free access, or rather you get access for life, as and when the, you know, that each lesson came online. So many people did that. Is it too early for me to create a course that I could sell to people? That's a hard question to answer. And the reason why is because, of course, we don't know how much experience you've got. Now, experience isn't necessarily the only thing you have to have, and it may be that actually you have something to give, not based on your experience, but based on something you've learnt, or something that you wanted to share. So it's a good idea, at least, if you're going to build a course, to have some sense of authority about what you're talking about. And so bear that in mind. But basically, if you have an idea for a business course, for instance, or any kind of course, and you want to go ahead and do it, just do it. Just start, I think. I see little reason why you should hang about. If you feel you've got a good premise, and if you want to start the process of building it, then go for it. And like I did, you know, especially if it's going to be a large course, the sales course, for instance, I'm about to launch is only 6 sessions. So I built the entire thing, because it only took me a day to put the thing together, and that's packaged and sold as is, whereas the 8-Step Startup courses took a long time to put together because there was a lot of research involved. So there's nothing wrong with you going early and doing a bit of a pre-launch approach, much like I did. Those of you, I know many people mention it all the time to me, those of you who have done these 67 steps, this Tai Lopez program, it's something I checked out at the back end of 2014 as well, and the 67 steps I believe was launched with also only a few steps to begin with, and then obviously Tai Lopez went ahead and built it as people were onboarding themselves as well. So that's something you can do. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's my answer. If you want to give me, PM me, whoever wrote this one in, if you want to give me a bit more detail, then I can answer, because maybe the answer might be different. But the concern I have, because I'm going to caveat this, the concern I have is with people putting together crap courses, and it's not about just banging out some content if your content's no good. Give people really good value. I'm not suggesting you have to be qualified as such. You know, you don't have to have an MBA to give business advice, but it's not necessarily going to be useful for people if you just spout ideas without any kind of substance. And in fact, that goes for any walk of life. If you're talking about anything, if you don't know what you're talking about and you're just making it up as you go along, well then in fact it may really harm people's businesses, especially if you're if your marketing's half decent, people buy into you, and then they go ahead and buy a course that's a bit rubbish, it may well, for instance, for a business do damage to what they already have. Okay, next question. So how do I actually go about growing my business? That's a big question. I understand your explanation of the plateau, and I don't want to sit at that point for longer than I have to. Okay, fine. So just to explain the plateau, I mean, it's not my thing. It's a general thing in business. If you can imagine, there's a graph of growth over time. You start with the rise phase when the business is growing. That's when you've got all that hunger. You're onboarding new customers. You've created your minimum viable product, and your product is then out there and getting people, interested, and you're getting feedback and things like that. So it's all exciting and things are growing and so on and so forth. That tends to happen at the start, but thereafter you then level off, and there's this thing called the plateau where your success level minimizes, or doesn't minimize so much, it just plateaus across time. That can be very short or very long, and the reason why that will be extended is simple. It's one word, and it's lack of innovation. So if you don't innovate enough, your business will not grow to the next level. Okay, so from the rise phase, this plateau basically is when you have a load of new customers and you start treading water because of the administrative requirements and demands on you and looking after those clients. And what happens is you tend to focus less on things like you focus less on things like customer acquisition each day. You focus more on just managing the business itself. The issue there, of course, means that you ultimately become to resent the company. And I've seen this, and I've been involved in this in myself in the past as well. If you are not innovating or trying to grow your business and doing new iterations of your product or service, or getting out there with something new, you will ultimately find your business becomes something you resent. Okay, if it's stale, because people need variety. Okay, your ambition that got you to this level in the first place will wane, and you'll get bored of it. Then it starts becoming excuses. Then you look elsewhere for your stimulation. It's a natural process. It's not something that's conscious or not. The way through what's known as the wall, is to avoid your decline and fall of your business through innovation. So new things, bring new things to the fore, and basically whilst you're selling your original product or proposition that you have to make use of what's known as the exploit explore model. Okay, so this is a chap called Kostas Andriopoulos, who's one of the professors at Cass Business School in London, told me about this. He calls it the ambidexterity model, and really simply he says, whilst you're exploiting the product you currently have, you need to basically simultaneously be exploring new iterations of that product or new ideas at the same time. So with that in mind, you need to be thinking, right, even if I'm doing great with my sales right now, what's next? Okay, no matter how wonderful your product is, it gets stale after a while. It gets a little bit boring for some people, or someone comes out and does something better. Okay, so you need to recognize that it's no good to sit on one thing. You need to build to the next. So always look for what your next iteration or product line is. And that original product might last forever, but that plateau phase, if without an innovation, that plateau phase elongates, and ultimately you get bored, you resent, and you leave. So this question is asking about how to move to grow the business. What you need to do is look at your product first. Grow from that hub. Could you improve your current product proposition or your service to a new iteration? Could you repackage elements of it? Could you possibly, bring out something that's similar to it? Or is there something else at the back of your mind that the sales from this original product would enable you to create? Whatever it is, you need to look at how you're going to innovate. Growth works that way. And as I've said before, when it comes to potential for growth, for instance, with a sales team or growing the company into new regions or new locations, whatever it might be, or new markets, the key thing is to remember that you should grow when it's possible, not when you feel comfortable. And I talked about this last week, this dichotomy between the idea of practical decision making and on the other side, emotional decision making. And typically speaking, for a startup business owner, practical decision making comes from decisions that are best for the company's needs. Emotional is the decisions that come from your needs. So if you don't want to do something because of fear, comfort zone issues, or kind of an apprehension that you have, that shouldn't come into play. You have to do what's best for the business when you're wearing the business owner hat. So with that in mind, if you can grow practical, then you should grow, not when it feels comfortable, emotional. Okay, that's the way to look at it. So in terms of growing your business, to answer the question, I don't know specifics because I don't know what your business is. You give me more detail, I could help with that. But in terms of you not wanting to sit in the plateau for longer than you want to, actually you've made a really important step by recognizing that. The next thing to do is step up a level. So is it a case that you're going to say to yourself, right, can I churn out more sales? But actually that's not necessarily going to grow you. That may generate you more capital, but what are you going to do with it? Could you expand to another region? Could you use that money to get yourself an assistant so that you can look at other iterations of your product? Or have you got the time and space now to look at how you can repackage and redistribute or build a new product? Because that is where your growth is going to come from. Business, really, that's where you need to be thinking. Okay, so hopefully that helps. By the way, if there are any questions, do pop them in here, and at the end of this I'm going to be giving you a bit of a notice about the sales course as well. Okay, so third question, can I use my Instagram memes on Facebook? Yeah, sure, of course you can. Technically you can, yes. I think a word on this that many people are probably quite familiar with is that you need to be really clear about how you use your different platforms. If social media for you is, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Snapchat, you need to recognize really simply that the same person will use those different platforms in different ways, okay? Someone will use Periscope in a different way they'll use Musical.ly. They'll use Musical.ly in a different way than they'll use Twitter and then Instagram and Instagram stories, in fact, and of course Facebook and so on. So with that in mind, you need to put thought on what content you're putting out there. If I work with Pinterest, okay, and I'm an arts and crafts kind of company, then I'm going to be putting very different content on there to what I'm going to be putting on Twitter. Likewise, absolutely, motivational memes arguably is a great way of getting a good following and getting people engaged on Instagram. And that's a lot of kind of visual diary based snapshots is of course what Instagram can be all about. That's not talking about stories yet, but that's not necessarily ideal for Facebook because people come on with a different agenda. So what you got to do is ask yourself, what would I do when I go on to each of these platforms? Why do I go on there? What is it I'm looking for? And what would my audience be thinking of, in the same scenario? And then give them what they want. So it's dangerous. I've experimented with it as well just to see what happened, and it definitely is true. It's dangerous to use the same post on every single platform. So if I take a picture of something and stick it on Snapchat, the same one then goes on Instagram stories, then I copy and paste that and put it on Instagram, then Twitter, and then on then on Facebook as well. I'm not going to get the same engagement across the those platforms, even if the audience is the same set of people, because going to those platforms means you're in a different state, you're in a different zone, you're thinking about different things. So you need to bear that in mind. Why do people come to your Facebook page? Experiment. This is what I did too. Experiment with different types of posts. Do Facebook Live, do photos, do pre-recorded video, try a YouTube upload, then try a native video in Facebook. Look at the difference there. I mean, for instance, I found an overwhelming surge of people will view a native Facebook video, and almost zero engagement will come from a YouTube video that I copy the link onto Facebook with. So with that in mind, I rarely would add a YouTube video. I would either download it from my account and upload it into Facebook, or do something like record it natively, because Otherwise, I'm getting zero content engagement. So always think, what is it that my audience are going to respond to? Why do they use that platform? That kind of helps at all, quite a bit. Okay, a question just come through from Nate. Hi, do you still use your own digital marketing, or do you do your own digital marketing, or do you work with a team? Yeah, good question. I do both, actually, Nate. I have a team of people who help with my marketing. A lot of the posts are from a number of people who help me with different things, and usually what they do is they send them to me. Rarely do people post on my behalf. I get a little bit of that on Twitter, but typically I always approve and then actually post. In the main, most of my digital marketing in terms of posting is pretty much 99% of it is produced by myself, because the thing is, what's required in at least my world is a strong amount of focus on personal branding, and so I'll only be myself, I'll be myself better than anyone else can be, basically. But in terms of digital marketing, there are a number of people who are involved in kind of the background that help with strategy and things like that as well. Hopefully it answers your question, Nate. So to answer that question on Instagram means, yeah, you can, but test it, see what happens. Don't expect the same results on every single platform. You may well find you've got the same audience on all of these platforms, but it doesn't mean they'll respond in the same way, because people go to Instagram for different things to which they go to Facebook. Next question, how do I get perception right? You guys got some big questions today. Perception, okay, so just explain what's meant by this. Perception online, in terms of social media and things like that, is really simply the information about your world that you show to people. And if you're running a business, with a startup business, it's what you share with the outside world. So the perception of some people is very poor, because they don't think necessarily about what information they put out there. And so while it's difficult, because what's crucial with your content a lot of the time is that you must be authentic and you must be genuine, you must be real, okay? Having said that, if you're having a really crap day and people are like, you've got customers yelling at you and things aren't working out, I'm not necessarily going to post that onto Facebook, because that makes me look like someone that, potential customers aren't going to want to work with. However, it may be that I use that and put a positive spin on it. Maybe I use it to show some humility, to show that I'm human, to show that, I'm fallible, and sometimes things don't work out, and I need to put a moral in there. If it's all woe is me as my message, then people don't like that. No one likes someone who's not being successful. No one wants to be tight with someone who's being a loser. So think hard about what you're actually putting out there. In terms of perception, what you got to think is the world typically, if you are who social media says you are, the world knows nothing about me other than that which I drip feed them or give them. So in terms of perception, you can actually only show things that are uber positive about your world, and then people will get a certain view of you. And in terms of this question, how do I get it right? Well, it's important to get down to thinking about what your purpose is. What's your business trying to do? What's it trying to sell? Okay, and then what would your audience want to see? Try and inspire them, try and give value, try and help them out. But in terms of perception of you, you need to be at least through the lens of social media, you need to live and breathe the businesses that you are talking about, or the kind of the message or the mission that you actually have, okay? Always be calculated, and that doesn't mean in a malicious or a kind of a Machiavellian way. There's nothing underhand about being calculated. It's recognizing that if you're going to use social media, or Facebook specifically, in this case, in a business sense, then everything you're doing is being documented and recorded, and sometimes you can never you can never get rid of things, because people then repost and copy and paste and send out there, and sometimes what you've put out online will never go away, because people might screen grab it and that's the end of it. So think hard on not just what your message is for now when you post, but also how it might resonate with people in the future. And a good example of this is, if you're going to whine and moan with someone online, what happens if your business becomes really big? Because people like to delve in and do their, due diligence and research, and then people uncover this kind of stuff about you. And there's a funny thing in the UK. It's a hilarious newspaper, and hopefully none of you lot read it. If you do, you should stop it. There's a newspaper called the Daily Mail, which is, for anyone who doesn't know it, it's one of the worst newspapers ever. It's written for 5-year-olds, and it's very inflammatory. You can imagine the media has a bit of a bad rep, and this is one of the prime culprits of it. So there's this thing called the Daily Mail test. So if you were to become uber famous, or your business to become super successful, would what you're putting out right now pass the Daily Mail test? As in, if people trying to write inflammatory content for in journalistic purposes in the media found all of your content, would there be anything they could use? And I would say, as a side point, I do the same with emails as well. Never write anything that could be incriminating or could go right against you in a court of law. It should be that any email you write to someone in the public, so a customer for instance, will never get you in hot water. So be always careful, as I say, be calculating about what information you pass out. Perception is everything. And even if you move away from the outside world with customers and the audience and look at your internal world, look at your team as well, then you need to think about how you speak to your team also. I've run teams for many years, over a decade. I've built and run teams in various companies, and it's not a case of not being yourself, but what it is a case of saying, if I literally am always wearing my emotions on my sleeve, just being open, if I'm having a crap negative feeling about my day, putting that out there is going to be have a negative effect on people. And that's more of a leadership point, but you've got to think about the kind of message and mission you're trying to get across, and make sure you live and breathe that. That's really what perception's about. Nate, you've added a little extra there. Cool, totally get the point of personal branding. Great job and good persistent hustle on Facebook Live. Thank you very much. Yes, do PM me later, Nate. Thanks a lot. Okay, so next question. What are your views on debt? Wow, seriously, I've never had such a large open-ended question. Debt is a tricky one, and debt in different situations has different outcomes, and it's quite clear it's one of those things where it depends is the answer. This is the way I look at it for businesses, because this is startup businesses, so let's keep things nice and tight, okay? So rather than, I'm not going to talk about personal debt, I'm talking about business here. If you are able to run with the idea of, if I don't have it, as in the money or capital, I don't get it. So for instance, if you want flashy new premises for your office, or a brand new PC to run your online business from, and you can't afford it, well then it's good to base yourself on a foundation of, well, I need to go out and get that money, I need to go and make that money, and then justify this purchase. So have sufficient income and funds to be able to purchase that thing off the bat. But that is true to an extent, because what that does, firstly, is it pushes away this idea of, oh, I've got the money, it's not necessarily a good business idea, but I'll just buy it because I want it. And being whimsical isn't necessarily a display of good business awareness. A great example of this was someone I was coaching last year, and I remember them saying, there's an opportunity to go to this mastermind course, okay, and it will be, I think it was be like $2,000 or something to go to it. And that would have cleaned this person out. He would have had zero money in his business bank account, but he was totally sold, and rightly so, I'm sure the mastermind would have been really useful. He was totally sold on this idea that this mastermind course could get him huge returns. And yes, it possibly could. I don't know. I mean, often with returns, it comes down to how much you're going to put back in, how much commitment you're going to put into something. Buying a book, going on a course doesn't make you successful. It's your application of that knowledge that makes you successful, you see. And what I said to him was, As a opportunistic move, it might be that you have to go all in on something like this because actually this can make the difference. However, from a business point of view, imagine instead of building a business on your own, that you were a CEO of a large company, and now you're going to spend all of that company's revenue, all of that company's capital on this one purchase. What happens if a better opportunity comes along? What happens if you don't implement this opportunity very well? What happens if it doesn't turn out to be as good as it is? What happens if you come back from that mastermind and an unknown entity presents itself, a curveball, which happens pretty much every month in a business anyway? Some extra expense comes up that you're in trouble, have to spend money on that you don't now have. As a business decision, it shows very poor business awareness to spend all of your money on one thing. So it's a very difficult way to look at things. So what I would say in terms of debt is, if temporarily there is a business benefit in acquiring some debt in order to step change your business and move up to another level, then there's value in doing it. I'd like to pride myself as a massive student of businesses, and anyone who's seen Startup Business TV, hopefully you like it. I've now done 6 episodes over the last 6 or so weeks, and the idea is I look at how a business has grown, well-known ones, so Amazon, Starbucks, Nike. The latest one was Zappos. And the idea is that most of these businesses did go out and get themselves loans or get themselves investors, and they did that because they wanted to grow aggressively. So maybe that was to acquire some inventory or create, to buy a warehouse or whatever it might be, and they needed investors because they could have waited, but it may have been that they had missed their opportunity if they'd done that. So on occasion, well, if it's well managed, there's nothing wrong with acquiring some debt, because then it will allow you to leverage into something an opportunity to kind of take advantage of an opportunity that's in front of you. But you better be sure you know how you're going to pay it off. You better be sure you have contingency in play. It's a mistake to go in and just grab a load of debt, because that takes kind of the pressure off you in terms of paying wage or whatever it might be. That I agree. I don't necessarily believe that that's the best reason to get debt, to kind of take the pressure off yourself. Sometimes pressure to, for instance, generate revenue through sales is a good thing, because it means you're in a better position with that kind of hunger and that desperation to really make it work, to then move your company forward. So in short, don't use debt unless you have to. And if you have to, it shouldn't be because you're in dire straits, but in fact it's because I have to take some debt on right now, because that's how I'm going to grow or innovate my company. If it's going to take you too long to organically save through revenue and sales that you generate yourself, then maybe it might be some value in getting some debt. And taking on a loan might mean that you can afford then to pay the wage of 2 salespeople, and you can afford to pay it back, but that will be the difference, because you just can't get out there enough. So it's very, very it's a delicate thing. You have to think it through, and you need to always bear in mind that you shouldn't take on debt that you can't pay off. And if you can't see how you'll ultimately pay it off, and it's a bit of a pipe dream, then maybe you might be headed for a bit of danger. Okay, so always take in some advice from higher up, more successful people on that point. Okay. Aaron's just put in a question: where do you think is the best place to find software developers? Yeah, really good question. I get asked this quite regularly, because nowadays many people are starting online businesses, but also anyone who isn't is also running a business that requires an online presence. I've found a good way to do it is if you go to Facebook groups. Just simply look for the right kind of groups, or groups of software developers. One where there's lots of engagement, one where it's quite techy and there are people who really know what they're doing. And I often would, I did this to an extent when I was looking for my web developer. I appreciate it might be slightly different to a software developer, but a web developer, I went to a group and I engaged with 3 or 4 different people, and I wasn't kind of playing them off each other, but I was just seeing what they could do. I said, can you send me your portfolio? Can you give me some examples of what you do? Give me prices and obviously and all that kind of thing, and get them really to interview and take it that way. I tend to find that works quite well. Also, if you have a good network, well, then ask, because actually if you ask online, you'll tend to find that if someone doesn't know, they might know someone who does, and then that passes things on. But what I did find was that ultimately I got my web developer from one of the three mentors that I was kind of working with about a year ago, that helped me as I started the 8-Step Startup course. This guy's about 60 or 70. He's built his own businesses. He's a multi-millionaire, yachts and Porsches and things like that. And I said, well, who does your web? Because I'd like to use your web developer. And so he put me in touch. And of course that person was able to deliver a half decent service, because of course this person done well as well. So I think the best place to find them is where there's an abundance, because the cream rises to the top. And if there's a group with loads of them in there, you tend to find that someone who is half decent they'll become apparent after a while. You can ask around in a group. If you ask around in a group of people who are good, you get people going to try and pitch you, but you also you'll find out who the best ones are there. But what you must do when you're looking for third parties or outsourcing of services like this is you must always look for multiple people to engage with. A big mistake I see is that a lot of people say, oh, I need an accountant, or I need a web developer, or I need a software engineer, or whatever, and they take the first person, or specifically they take the first person they get on with. If you have this is a really important business lesson, if you have a nice conversation with someone, it doesn't mean they are good at what they do. It means you've had a nice conversation with someone. I was saying this to someone in London on Wednesday last week, and there's a sales manager who's talking about his pipeline with me. And he was saying, I love this guy, I really think it will go really well, I think we'll get a big deal out of it, because we had a really nice conversation. I said, good, well done, you had a nice conversation, but is he actually going to do it? And when we took apart the nuts and bolts, he has no idea if this guy's going to do this or not. He just likes him because he accepted him and he feels comfortable having a chat with him. Sometimes the best people are a little bit standoffish. They might be a bit introverted, maybe you don't get much from them on a personal or social level, but they're one hell of a great person when it comes to doing what they're doing. Great example is as a chap I'm in touch with at the moment, who is, if you're watching this, by the way, you know who I'm talking about, who is building a sales funnel, and he's been very patient because we've had so many things in the way that have slowed him down. And he, when we first engaged, said something like, please excuse my English, and he's from Eastern Europe. His English is actually amazing, but he's really direct, okay? And it could, for some, come across as being a bit rude or impolite, but no, that's just how he talks, and that's him, working from his language into mine, and that's fine, because the main thing is he looks like he's half decent at what he's doing. So the best place to find software engineers, developers, I think, is online, like with anything else, because there's loads of them. Don't advertise in the local press. Get into Facebook, look to a local group. But one thing I would say is my experience with any third-party people throws up the same thing and again and again. And this is, if you're taking notes, by the way, if you're going to find someone who's going to do some work for you, artists, content, software developers, web designers, accountants, whoever it is, there are two things you must have. One on its own isn't enough. Firstly, it kind of goes without saying, you must have someone who's half decent at what they're doing. They have to be able to provide evidence they know what they're doing. Don't necessarily go out on a limb with someone because you feel they're a lovely person, but they have no evidence of their ability. They must be good. But the second thing, which is just as important, I find, is they must be responsive. Because I've worked with people in the past who are good at what they do, but they don't get back to you for 4 days, or they manage your expectations really poorly. You ask them how things are progressing, they don't answer those emails. You ask them, for instance, are we going to meet this deadline? Can you give me a feel of when you're going to be able to get this thing done? No response. And then other emails may be more technical, they're there straight away. And I appreciate that sometimes people are busy and things, but when it's clear as day, they just don't like to give you any kind of commitment or manage your expectations properly. That's really difficult. You need people responsive, people who are going to go the extra mile, rather than someone who's going to be a little bit part-timer about it. So think on that, it's really important. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Aaron, and helps a bit. That's what I've found in my experience. I've got a question as well. What's the main reason why some entrepreneurs engage in shadow marketing in order to generate a starting capital? Can you give me a bit more detail, please? Give me an example, and I'll try and answer that before I finish up. Okay, just give me an example of that. Next question, should I get involved in MLM? God, that's controversial. It has a pretty bad press, but the method seems simple enough to make an income. Right, it might get contentious if I talk about MLM, but I will. Okay, so I haven't worked with any MLM businesses, so Amway or anything like that, and I haven't been involved in any pyramid schemes of that nature. So my experience can only be from what I've seen. However, there's so many studies done on this, and many using the data from the actual businesses themselves. The difficult thing is, those who don't do MLM see a lot of negativity, and he's right, there is a bad press around a lot of it. I see a lot of negativity. Those who are bought into MLM will swear blind it's the greatest thing ever. It's not. You always hear someone who does MLM, you know they are, because they say it's not a pyramid scheme, because they don't like the negative connotations. Of course it is, but you just don't want to say it. And the thing is that it's really hard to break through all of that crap to actually find out what the truth is. It seems that with MLM, the reality is you're not likely to generate, percentage-wise or statistically, you're very unlikely to generate returns. You may be the most pumped up, focused entrepreneur in the world, and with MLM, if you're totally committed, I see no reason why it can't be of use to you. But there are numbers thrown about based on very, very convincing data, and I like to work off evidence. I hate it when people make big statements without any kind of, any kind of factual basis behind it. And it seems to be clear that for the majority of those in MLM, you are unlikely to make any decent income from it. Okay, it is possible, but like with anything, it is possible to become a Hollywood actress. It is possible to be a world-class sports star, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are going to. And the percentages, I've seen percentages as low as 0.3% of people who do MLM actually generate more income than they spend to actually be involved in it. I've had stats I've seen in the past that say things like 1% of people involved in MLM make more than $10,000 in a year. And it's very, very difficult to work with these kind of numbers. And it's interesting, I've very sensitively asked people involved in MLM in the past, because I'm sure, like you guys, you've been pitched a lot by it, and I've been pitched a lot over the years, certainly, or recently. And if you have an Instagram account for more than 2 minutes, you get people trying to rope you into their schemes. And if ever I ask, and I remember doing this recently, so what earnings did you actually get last month? You never tend to get the straight answer, but you often hear, oh, well, my mentor is about to make 6 figures a year. Good. Okay, but it needs to be a little bit more transparent like that. To answer this question, should I get involved in MLM? It depends. Have you got the propensity towards great success in MLM? Are you the kind of person that has the drive to go out and recruit everyone you can ever recruit in this idea of building your pyramid, because that means a lot to you? Are you willing to use capital for a long time and not make much in the way of income, so the statistics suggest, in order to actually end up hopefully making some kind of income from it? Yeah, go for it if that's a passion. My personal view is that as it stands, I wouldn't do it, because I'm a big believer in doing something that really gets you passionate, insofar as it shouldn't be about generating huge income. huge income is a wonderful byproduct that you tend to find, and I'd like to think I'm an authority on this, is that you tend to find when you do something stimulating that you love, you tend to then find you get a wonderful income from it. And that's a byproduct rather than the point of focus. And it's something you'll fall down on eventually, I strongly believe, if you only focus on money generation. Plus, and there's a video that came out today, I think by Gary Vaynerchuk, and I posted it as well because I think it was wonderful. You may make money, but your grandchildren will think you're a dick. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Do something where in the future you're going to be really proud of it, you know, and people who have lots of money often, or people who talk about money often say, if someone says, you know, money isn't everything, it's because they don't have any. Well, I disagree. I have plenty of money and I don't believe it's everything. What is everything is having a stimulating life, being with family and doing the things you want to do. They are things that are in part enabled by having money, but it's certainly not everything. It's a great enabler, but it's not everything. So it has a bad press, has MLM. Do your research. You look, I think it's Herbalife that posted a year or so ago, posted profits of almost $5 billion. So it must be money there, but do you want to do it? Genuinely, when it's 4 in the morning, and I always say this is simple, if it's 4 in the morning and you're really tired and you're worn out and you're having crap results, are you gonna push yourself for another hour for an MLM business? And if the answer is yes, then go for it. If the answer is no, because it's not really something to the core in my DNA am I going to be passionate about, then why the hell would you want to do it? Because it's no different, that kind of slog is no different to a classic 9 to 5 job that puts you in a state of misery, where you live because you're trying to make money rather than because you're doing something you're stimulated in. Bear that in mind. I've been working, it's not a huge amount of time, but it's still a decent amount of time to know what I'm talking about, for 15 years, 10 of which were in the city in London. And what I strongly believe is that you can make all the money in the world, but you better be stimulated by it. Otherwise, all those waking hours are being kind of wasted. And you get to a point, which I did, where you say to yourself, I could have this income tripled. I remember thinking, triple my income, and I still wouldn't really want to bother doing it anymore, because actually it's not stimulating me. Let's go do something that's really interesting and gets me passionate. And the funny thing is that I've done less of the stuff that kind of dragged me into an office, and more of the stuff that I thought would just be kind of fun, and I make more money doing it that way. So that's something to bear in mind. Anyway, rant over. I didn't want to go on a tirade about it, because MLM is inflammatory subject for many, and I'm sure you have your own opinions. I'd love to hear them. Just for the record, I have no problem with people who want to do MLM, but I have a problem with people who do things for the wrong reason, because I think that's a big old waste of the resource and time that you have. Aaron just popped a question in there. Umar, if you want to give me some more detail on that shadow marketing question, or PM me, then I'll happily answer it. Aaron, before you end, can you explain how entrepreneurs can stay motivated on big projects? I think with any project, in fact, you need to be focused always on the mission. So you have to think about what the mission actually is, because when motivation can wane is often when you're stuck in this kind of the little nitty gritty bits, and it's quite hard to see the wood for the trees, as it's said. You need to always have in mind the actual end goal and how that relates to the rewards for you as well. And it's the same as things like, for instance, if you're not so keen on cold calling, but it's something you have to do with your business, well, then associate the act of cold calling someone less with the feeling of rejection you might get, and more with the reward that it represents. I'm not talking about money or commission. I'm talking about what that commission would enable you to do. Is it one more step closer to buying a house that you want? Is it one more step closer to being able to give yourself a personal pay rise? Or if you're an employee, is that cold call one step closer to a promotion or something like that? Associate the rewards with the act, and that tends to help quite a bit. And in terms of staying motivated on not necessarily big projects, but protracted projects, Aaron, I think it's important to continually stay on top of where you are each day. So have a kind of a godlike or helicopter view, as it's sometimes said, of the whole project each day, just to get your perspective right. Here's where I am on this whole timeline or this journey. I'm at this stage. Yeah, I've got this kind of work or this slog to get through perhaps, but if I zoom out, I can see how there's that progression. I'm going in the right place, and it really puts you in the right frame of mind there. Also, one thing I do is I break, of course, as anyone would, I break my larger projects down into smaller tasks and daily tasks. I have a list of tasks, and most of those tasks will be associated with a reward. It's a personal reward I've given myself, and I break them down. This is something as a chap I worked with about a year or so ago. I was interested in how he did his social media. A guy called Matt Pocious, and it was just an idea he had. And he said what he does is every time he has a task completed, he has some popcorn, or he listens to a favourite tune or something like that. And I thought it was a really good idea. So what I do is I do it literally from tiny tasks. So if I have to do reports for clients each day, it's something I do every single day. When I complete those reports, I get a little reward, okay? And that might be I listen to one tune. So I don't just listen to music, I listen to it as a reward. Then if I generate, I generate £1,500 of sales in a day, then I usually allow myself to go and buy an audiobook or something like that. And something larger, of course, has some larger reward attached to it. But the nice thing about doing that is that you are associating rewards with the task, but what actually is happening is you're associating little victories throughout the day with a nice feeling, which is the dopamine that comes from having the reward that you've assigned yourself. For many people, having popcorn, they don't really care about it, so it needs to be their own reward instead. That tends to help. Day on day, you constantly reminding yourself that you're being successful with these little victories. So maybe it's, I don't know, I'm not going to suggest chocolate bars and things like that, but whatever it is, you give yourselves these little rewards as you go along. And like a dog with a treat, it means that you want to do more of it. But if you restrict yourself, it sounds a little bit kind of Puritan, right? But if you restrict yourself to only having nice things when you do something good, then it means you tend to do more things good. And that means smashing through your task list and, of course, being motivated on big projects. So it's not just doing it, it's how you go about managing yourself as you do it. That helps. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one here. When should I hire an assistant? I think for many people, I think for some startup business owners, I've seen that they tend to hold off hiring assistant because they don't view them as being transactional. And it's difficult when you're a solopreneur. If you're building and running your own business, you tend to find that you can justify whatever expenses you are taking to pay yourself because you're making the money back. And it's quite straightforward to justify getting a sales manager, for instance, if they're generating sales because they pay for themselves. Whereas arguably with assistants that you could say, well, they're not transactional. I've got to take a load of money to pay that person to not get much money in return. Yeah, but it's about what it enables. It's about creating that space and time for you to then be able to do other things. I think the answer is as soon as it feels like you're starting to amass plenty of certainly the more smaller or trivial tasks, and that are impeding your ability to then do larger things, or rather to be able to do the things that stimulate you. So I think fairly soon is the answer. You should be doing it quite early on, and if you have a feeling that you've got a lot of things to do, and it's all mounting up, and you can't do the main things that are going to help you move on from that plateau phase, as I talked about at the start of this session, to be able to innovate because you're just being dragged under by administration and so on, well then that is the time when you need to be getting an assistant, and possibly a bit too late in fact. So quite early on, earlier than you think in fact. Bear in mind this, an assistant isn't someone who does all the small tasks. while they may do that as part of their daily work, an assistant is an enabler for you to have more of the time that you are being given each day to then do the bigger things that are going to move the company in the right direction. Okay, so that's the way you need to view it. It is an enabler. It's a lubricant that gets you greater growth. In the same way as hiring someone in sales, once you've invested the time in training them up, they become someone who, you know, they're going to double your ability to spread the word. There's you, and now there's a guy doing the same. You know, you've got someone now who, sure, you're going to have to pay them commission or a salary if you choose to go that way, but in return, they're going to be generating you more sales. More people are going to be aware of you. There are going to be more people evangelizing about your product now. So that is an important way to look at it. It's your right perspective. Okay, a couple more questions. So can you explain how you developed your reading style? I got this question a little while back, so I stuck this one on. My reading style varies between book to book, and it also varies in terms of what I'm trying to get out of a book. So for instance, when I read a biography, as fast as I can, I try and just splurge my way through. I read the whole thing cover to cover because I feel like a biography tends to be the kind of entity that needs to be read fully back to back. When I look at larger books that I feel I need to consume the knowledge about, I tend to flip to audiobook. And I spend a lot of time in the car and going to meetings and things like that. And if I'm commuting or anything, that's an opportunity to listen to an audiobook and it's not dead time. There's no such thing as dead time. It's what you make of all of your time. But if there are a couple of hours here and there that I have that I can work on smashing through an audiobook, that's a good way of getting through the bigger ones that and often the ones that are really seminal, important books, they're worth doing by audio because of course you have the author reading it typically, and what I tend to find with a lot of books is when they're read by the author, they go off piste and add a little extra here and there, especially more the how-to kind of books. But how I developed my reading style was simple. I looked at what I needed to do. What I needed to do was consume a lot of books throughout a week because that helps me with my business and it helps me with many different things. And in order to consume them, many books in a week in very short periods, there's 15 minutes or half an hour, that is the amount of time I read, and that's 3 times a day. I needed to look at what the actual nugget of information is for the book, so central thesis, or for the particular chapter I was focused on. And really simply what I would do is I'd look at the chapters, let's say, and I think to myself, right, you've got 15 minutes, find out the bit of information. Now, anecdotes and stories that are added to that chapter are there to add, you could argue there to add fluff. Well, they're there to reinforce the point, okay? If they're there to reinforce the point, then, and I already know what the point is because I've found it, I don't need that point to be reinforced. What's happening is you have this central nugget of information, that's the bit they could probably put in one line, and then the authors added lots of anecdotes and stories around it to pad it out so you really get it and so that you can visualize what they really mean by way of an anecdote. If you don't need that because you just need to understand what the point is, then you can move on. And that's kind of my idea is, right, 15 minutes, find out what the information is, and now I can move on, write a note, and then I've got that basic bit of info from that book, put it on the shelf, check it out another time, or read another chapter of it. So my reading style is based on what I've needed to get from a book, really. Let's finish with the last question, which I've deliberately put last, which is, when is your sales course coming out? It was meant to come out last week. The reason why I've held off is because I've had an issue with the website. So here's what I'm doing. The sales course will be $147. It is 6 lessons. Those lessons will cover the essential basics. It's called Richard Moore's Basics of Sales. My 15 years of experience in sales is in this. For someone who has no experience in sales, or some experience, or plenty of experience, or a startup business owner who knows they need to be involved in sales, it's designed for if you're on the phone, email, in person, whatever it is. But the idea is it covers the basics. So engaging and connecting with someone, so building rapport, how to do that. It covers things like objection handling, finding out what the need is, closing, upselling, and of course mindset as well. And this is all from many years of working with hundreds of salespeople and sales directors and managers as well, and of course making millions of pounds or dollars, if you like, of sales over the years as well. So all of that is crunched down to a really simple course. Because it's not live yet, if you are interested in having it now, I'm happy to send you it's all 6 lessons. They are private links at the moment, but you can have the full content. It will be just links so you can access it through YouTube, and that will be for $47 instead of $147, which is what it will be when it's actually embedded within the website. So if you want to wait, you can pay more when it looks all pretty on a website, or you can have the same raw sales material right now. PM me and you can have it for $47, and probably by next week that will change. So a lot of people have been asking me for it. If you want the course, you can have it right away at that price. Okay. If there are any more questions, let me know. Thank you so much. That's all I've got time for today. So on Thursday at 1 p.m. GMT, 8 a.m. Eastern time, we'll be doing the sales Q&A, and there's more coming this week. Check out also the Startup Business Q&A, Startup Business TV episode, number 7 coming out. Who knows who it will be? So you'll find out this week. And if you haven't seen Zappos last week, even Zappos, by the way, has liked it. So it seems to be that it's gone quite well. And then Zappos, actually, I didn't screenshot grab it for everyone, but not only did they like the video, that they also then tweeted back to 8-Step Startup, the Twitter account, and said, it was something like, what do you think of it? Do you like Zappos as well? So they were engaging. It was really kind of them. And whilst I'm no illusion it probably wasn't Tony Hsieh, the CEO, doing it, it's nice that they recognised my work. So that was good. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But otherwise, thanks you for paying attention, and I'll catch you all soon. Have a great Monday.